People love to say that hardship makes you stronger. It sounds comforting, it sounds fair, and it's mostly wrong. Going through too much doesn't automatically create resilience, wisdom, or emotional depth. More often, it creates hypervigilance, emotional contradictions, and behaviors that get misunderstood as cold, detached, or difficult. That misunderstanding has real consequences. It leads people to misjudge survivors, to push them harder instead of listening closer, and to assume that silence means peace when it usually means exhaustion. People who have gone through too much are not broken, but they are changed in very specific psychological ways. And if you don't understand those changes, you will consistently misread their behavior, sometimes in ways that damage relationships beyond repair. Let's talk about what actually happens to the mind when life overloads it repeatedly. Why strong is usually the wrong word. One of the biggest myths is that people who've endured a lot are emotionally strong in the traditional sense, calm, stable, unshakable. In reality, what you're often seeing is adaptation, not strength. The nervous system learns to survive by narrowing its range. Less hope, less expectation, less emotional exposure. Not because the person doesn't feel deeply, but because feeling deeply became dangerous at some point. This is why these individuals often feel, on edge in calm situations. Calm doesn't feel neutral to them. Calm actually feels suspicious. Their system is just waiting for the moment it breaks. In relationships, this can make them seem overly sensitive or reactive. But what's actually happening is that they're responding to patterns that once mattered deeply, even if they don't anymore. Why they struggle with simple happiness. Another misconception is that once the hardship is over, happiness should come naturally. But the brain doesn't work that way. Prolonged stress reshapes reward systems. Dopamine, the chemical involved in motivation and pleasure, just doesn't fire the same way after long-term adversity. Joy can feel muted, fleeting, or even undeserved. Many people who've gone through too much report feeling emotionally flat during moments that should feel good. Achievements don't land, compliments feel hollow, rest feels uncomfortable. This isn't ingratitude, it's a nervous system that hasn't relearned safety yet. There's also often guilt attached to happiness. When you've survived situations where others didn't, or where pain was constant, joy can feel like a violation of some internal rule. The mind asks, who am I to relax now? That question doesn't come from logic, it comes from survival conditioning. This is why control becomes a coping mechanism. Control is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in people who've experienced chronic stress. It's easy to label it as rigidity or stubbornness, but psychologically, it's really a way to create predictability in a world that once had none. This can show up as strict routines, difficulty delegating, emotional guardedness, or, honestly, just a strong need to plan ahead. When life once felt chaotic or unsafe, control becomes pretty much synonymous with security. Losing control doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels dangerous. And in relationships, this often causes friction. The person may struggle with uncertainty, mixed signals, or emotionally ambiguous situations. They may push for clarity faster than others are comfortable with, not because they're impatient, but because, ambiguity activates threat responses in their nervous system. Understanding this really reframes the behavior. It's not about dominance, it's about stability. That's why they're slow to trust and fast to detach. Trust doesn't reset easily after it's been broken repeatedly. For people who've gone through too much, trust isn't really a feeling, it's a calculation. And even then, it's provisional. They often observe quietly for a long time before emotionally investing. They watch how people respond under stress, how they handle boundaries, how consistent their words and actions are. And even once trust is formed, it can collapse quickly if certain lines are crossed. This leads to a pattern outsiders often misinterpret. The person seems deeply loyal, until suddenly they're gone, emotionally unavailable. Done. This isn't impulsive detachment, it's delayed decision-making. By the time they leave, they've already processed weeks or months of internal data. For them, leaving is often an act of self-preservation, not punishment. Why vulnerability feels physically unsafe. People love to encourage vulnerability as if it's a switch you can flip with enough reassurance. But vulnerability requires a sense of safety that many people who've gone through too much simply don't have yet. Opening up once may have led to being dismissed, exploited, or hurt. Over time, the body associates emotional exposure with threat. This isn't a belief problem, it's a physiological one. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, words disappear, silence becomes protective. This is why some people can talk openly about surface-level trauma, but shut down when conversations get emotionally present. Storytelling feels safer than connection. Describing the past is different from being seen in the present. Pushing vulnerability without safety doesn't heal this, it reinforces it. Why they often feel older than their age. Many people who've endured significant hardship describe feeling psychologically older than their peers. This isn't about maturity in a flattering sense. It's about accelerated emotional processing. They've had to confront loss, responsibility, or existential uncertainty earlier than most. That shapes perspective. Small problems feel trivial. Social drama feels exhausting. They may struggle to relate to peers who haven't faced similar depth. This can create loneliness even in social settings. Not because they think they're better than others, but because their internal reference points are different. They're carrying weight others haven't had to consider yet. What actually helps, and what doesn't? What helps people who've gone through too much is not motivational language, forced positivity, or pressure to move on. Those approaches often invalidate lived experience. What helps is, consistency, predictability, being believed without being analyzed, relationships where safety is demonstrated through actions, not just reassurances, environments where emotions don't have to be justified. Healing, when it happens, is usually slow and honestly kind of unremarkable. It looks like slightly longer moments of calm, slightly less scanning, slightly more room for joy without guilt. Progress measured in nervous system regulation, not, personality transformation. And sometimes, healing doesn't mean becoming lighter, it means becoming more integrated, learning how to live with depth without being consumed by it. If this feels personal, here's what matters most. If you recognize yourself in this, there's nothing wrong with you. Your mind adapted intelligently to conditions that required it. The goal is not to erase those adaptations, but to update them. To teach your nervous system that the rules have changed. And if you're trying to understand someone like this, the most important thing to remember is that their behavior makes sense in context. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's hard to read. Understanding human psychology isn't about labeling traits, it's about understanding origins. If this kind of grounded, experience-based psychology resonates with you, subscribe to It's All Psychological. Share this video with someone who wants to understand people more deeply, including themselves. Because the more accurately we understand the mind, the less damage we do to each other without realizing it.